How does one person serve in the same church for 36 years? Stick around and we'll talk about that. Welcome to the Here at Home podcast, a podcast about the people here at McGregor, their stories, their ministry, and their love for Jesus. If you're joining us for the first time, my name is Mark Bricker, and I'm the host for the Here at Home podcast. And thank you so much for joining us. We'll bring you a fresh new episode every other week, and we'd love to have you be a part of our Here at Home podcast community. So go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. That way you'll get each episode delivered straight to your podcast player. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please share it with your friends. So, welcome our guest today, Cary Robinson. Welcome to the show, Cary.
Thanks, Pastor Mark. Good to be here.
So glad to have you. In fact, I've been looking forward to our time together, sitting around the table, conversing a little bit.
There you go.
Now, not that there's got to be only a handful of people in all of Fort Myers that don't know who Cary Robinson is. But for those few people that don't know Cary, tell us a little bit about yourself and your family as we get started.
Well, I am a Floridian, which is unusual for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. I was born in Clearwater, raised in Largo. I went to Largo High School. I was born, my mom and dad took me home to the same home that I graduated from high school in.
Wow.
So I lived in that same house until I was 18 years old, almost 18 years old. And then I went to 1 year of junior college in Clearwater, and then I went to Carson Newman. And I got an undergraduate degree in accounting, and I worked for a year in accounting before I went to seminary. And now that's where I met my wife, my beautiful wife, Vicki. We married while I was in school. Finished school and then came to McGregor. Got 3 kids, all adults, grown. I've got 2 biological grandkids and 2 step grandkids. So we have a good time with them.
How long have you and Vicki been married?
Almost 38 years.
Almost 38 years. Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting some of how our paths have crossed because, and we were talking about this the other day, but I lived in Clearwater for about 6 or 7 years, mm-hmm. and that would have been the same time that you were in Largo, but still some of the things that were similar there. So
yeah, it is a small world.
Small world. Now, you've been serving here at McGregor for 36 years. That's amazing.
That is correct.
Did you come here right out of high school? Is that how you're able to do that?
I like to tell people that I started when I was a baby.
Yeah, 36 years. Now, what's so amazing about that, and I don't know if our listeners understand kind of what that means, but when you think about people that serve in ministry, and you know this, and you see statistics, and sometimes it changes, and I did a little research, earlier this week, and the different sites will tell you different things, but anywhere between 3 and 5 years is about the average tenure for a minister or pastor in a church. 3 to 5 years. That's not a lot. That means a lot of people are hopping around. And so to stay one place for 36 years is pretty remarkable. Mm-hmm. Before we talk about the longevity and ministry aspect, let's back up because you mentioned real quickly there about, coming from seminary, but what was the process? How did you end up here in Fort Myers? Because this was, I'm assuming a relative, you were from Florida, but not Fort Myers area. So
no.
How did you get here?
Good question. When you graduate from seminary, as you're approaching your graduation, you start sending out resumes to generally, at that time, we had what we called as students placement office. They didn't refer to themselves as a placement office at the seminary, but it was a place where you could send your resume or give them your resume back that day, and also send it to the state office, the Florida Baptist Convention. So I sent my resume to the Florida Baptist Convention. I also sent it to our placement office at the seminary at Southwestern in Texas, and received a phone call from Jim Holbrook, who was the pastor at the time here at McGregor. And my memory at the time, he told me that he'd gotten my resume from both places, the Florida Baptist Convention and the seminary Southwestern. And what both places do is they send 6-10 resumes to those churches that are asking for, hey, we're looking for this guy. They give some kind of a profile, and then the state or the seminary sends out resumes. That's the way we did it then before we had these agencies that
these search groups.
But from there, Jim called me, and we were going to. It's kind of a funny story. We had discussed preliminarily that I would fly here to Fort Myers from Texas, and then he said, my son lives outside of Fort Worth. He said, I think I'll just come there and interview you there. So sure enough, that's what happened. He came to Fort Worth, and while he was there, he discovered that he could actually interview many people while he was on campus.
There's a whole bunch of people here looking for jobs.
Hello. But we really connected in that interview, and I actually left the interview, and I went home and I told my wife, I said, we're going to Fort Myers. So just had a really good connection with Pastor Jim. And sure enough, a few weeks later, he called me and said, hey, we'd like for you and your wife to fly to Fort Myers. We'd like our search committee to interview you. You could teach. They were thinking at the time of calling me a singles and students. So I would teach the singles on a Friday night. I would do student ministry on Sunday morning, meet with the committee, kind of like in view of a call type of thing. And so that's what I did. The funny thing is that when we came, Vicki and I had honeymooned on Sanibel Island, knowing nothing about Fort Myers.
Oh, wow. And
true story, as we were leaving out of Fort Myers, we drove by the church. They just probably had moved here. And pulling out of Fort Myers, regardless, I had said to my wife, I said, wouldn't it be crazy if we came back to, we loved Fort Myers. We loved Sanibel.
Yeah.
What's not there to love? And so when Jim called me and said that he was from Fort Myers, it didn't really connect that.
That was near Sanibel.
Exactly.
They were the same.
Yeah. But we flew into town. Obviously, we figured that out as we were getting ready to come. We stayed out on the beach during that search weekend. But the chairman of the personnel committee came over the first morning that we were here and said, hey, you mind if we drive out to Sanibel for breakfast? No, that's great. And Vicki and I were like, yeah, we honeymoon on Sanibel. Yeah. Well, we pull up to the same restaurant that Vicki and I, that's associated with the hotel where Vicki and I stayed. So it was kind of ironic. Very good. And it was a great weekend. And
the rest is history.
The rest is history. Although there were some changes after that weekend, Jim decided that instead of hiring one person for both students and singles, that he would hire two of us out of Southwestern, singles and youth. And so the church decided to, alter those job descriptions. And so I came as the student pastor.
All those 12 interviews, he found someone else.
He did. He absolutely did.
He was out there. That's another commonality we have. We both went to Southwestern.
Yeah. Yes, we did.
I don't think we crossed paths there. I think you finished right about the time I was starting.
Yeah, I finished in December of 83. No, 84.
And I started in 85.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just missed you. Oh, well. Oh, well. All right. So you've been here now 36 years and some change. I've been here 21 and some change. And so it's, I'm not in your league yet, but for me, 21 seems like a long time. Let's talk a little bit about longevity in ministry, because I think you and I both know the benefits of staying around and being, in one place for a long time.
Right.
But how do you get there? What would be some of the secrets? And I use that word secrets, but what are some of the things that you think have helped in being able to stay in one place for 36 plus years?
Great question. I think one of the things is trying to stay focused on what God has called you to do. I think that a lot of guys are always looking for something that's bigger and better. And as you and I know, it's not always bigger or better. Mm-hmm.
The grass isn't always greener, yes, on the other side. No.
But, when I look back on my 36 years, there have certainly been seasons where God had stirred me and, I'm thinking, I think I'm, it's my time's up. But, it's God who orchestrates it. It's not anything that I have done. I think I've tried to find contentment with what God has called me to do, which I think is very important. But ultimately, at any point, as you know, God could have moved us, and it would have been what God desired. But clearly that wasn't God's desire for the past 36 years. What's interesting too is Vicki and I, knowing that the tenure at that time, they were telling us out of seminary that the tenure of a youth pastor was 18 to 24 months.
Oh, wow.
And neither Vicki or I wanted to get in a situation where we were moving like that. It's like, I want to move every couple of years. So we really earnestly prayed that God would, help us find a place that we could become planted. Mm-hmm. And certainly that God answered that prayer.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I love how you said it, that it really was, it's God that ultimately has kept you here.
Right.
I think you would have been faithful if he had called you to leave. And absolutely. I'm not saying that if somebody doesn't stay somewhere 35 years, they're out of God's will. I think God moves people intentionally for his will and his purposes. Yep. And so we just have to be obedient. But I also think there are huge benefits to longevity in ministry. And I like to, we like to kid with, around with you to say, if you need to know something about something in the past of McGregor, its history or people, then talk to Cary. But that's one of the beauties of being around, or the benefits, I guess, of being around that long. Yeah. What are some of the other things that you feel are helpful for being in one place this long?
Well, I told somebody the other day, there are a lot of benefits of longevity, and I feel for those that don't, stick in one place long enough to be able to see some of the fruit of longevity. I mean, I've been in here long enough to see young people that when they were in my student ministry, that they went off the rails and they, just left the church, left God, and then they came back. And being here has allowed me the blessing of being able to see that return to the prodigal, and it's just been a real encouragement. And having relationships that span 36 years, I mean, it's kind of funny now that I work with senior adults, but literally I have some of my first students that were in my youth ministry that are now knocking on the 55 plus door. When I first took this position in 55 plus, the first gathering that I was at, I had some of those early 50s that were saying, "Hey, will you watch my mom and dad? They're this and that, because their mom and dads are now in that 55 plus world." Well, that longevity of those relationships afforded that kind of conversation. So it's been awesome. I feel really, really blessed to be able to be in one place for a long time, and I definitely am reaping some of the benefits of that longevity and just relationally and being able to connect with people.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's back up because you just mentioned your current position as adult 55 plus pastor, but you started as youth. Yep. But there's been a progression along the way. So let's work through the years here.
Yeah.
So what year did you start?
January of 85.
85 as the student
pastor.
Minister, or youth pastor.
Back then it was called the youth pastor.
Yeah, okay. And then?
I did the youth ministry for 15 years. I was approaching 40. Do I say that on the podcast? I was approaching 40, and I still loved students. There was nothing that I didn't like, about the ministry to students. But when I began as a student minister, I saw myself as what we called back in the day in ministry terms as a lifer. I was one of those guys that felt called to student ministry. That's what I wanted to do. And when people would say it was a stepping stone, no, not for me. I want to do youth ministry. But by the time I was getting to be 40, God started changing my heart a little bit. And especially when it came to one of those things that we do when we're in youth ministry is these lock-ins where you lock students in for 24 hours. And I'm like, Lord, if I have to do another lock-in. So I'm approaching 40. God is stirring my heart to do something different. I was really having a burden for our college students. We had a pretty large youth ministry and trying to stay connected to those college students. And at that time, most of our college students went away to college. They didn't stay local. So trying to stay connected to them was just really difficult. And I felt like, here I had invested, 7-8 years in their life, and then they go off to college and, there's nothing.
Right.
And a lot of them, those are tough years and struggling years for so many people. So I'm wrestling with all this, and at the same time, Jim retires. We call Dr. Powell, And literally his second day in the office, he asked me to come into his office, and he asked me, you know, what do you want to do? Where do you see yourself? And the question was, where do you see yourself in 5 years? So I really wasn't prepared for the question. But I was determined to be honest with him. And I told him, I said, you know, God is stirring me. I said, I love what I do. And I did love students. But I said, you know, in 5 years, I could easily see myself doing young singles ministry or missions or discipleship, something along those lines. And so out of that conversation, he says, you know, well, why don't we just begin to pray about that? And he said, you know, I could definitely see you as, you know, our college young adult pastor. And so within 2 weeks, you know, we made that transition. And initially the transition was for young singles, college and 20-somethings, and a discipleship. So I did the Wednesday night programming and the young singles. Did that for 18 years. Discipleship went away after a couple of years because the young adult ministry had just blew up. So discipleship went away, went back under the education minister. I think that's you.
Yeah, I think so.
And then 4 years ago, now it's almost been 5 years ago, after Dr. Powell had left, and in this transition, Dan Allen left, and at the time, you know, everybody was joking, you're going to be here long enough to be the senior adult pastor. And I'm like, that's never going to happen. And when Dan left, it was presented to me. I was asked if I'd be interested. And Vicki and I have always had a heart for our seniors, and we felt like there was a lot of built-in relationships because a lot of the senior adults in our church had kids in my youth ministry.
Parents, yeah.
So after some prayer, you know, we felt like that was just the next best move for us. So I look at it as we've had basically 3 full-time positions: student ministry or youth ministry, young adult pastor, and now senior adult pastor.
Yeah. Was it hard, this last one, taking that? Because even though that you had those first 2, they were closely related,
yes.
You know, and here there was a jump.
Yeah, there was a big jump. It was hard, but I think that I'm relational at the core.
Very
so, much. You know, just because I made that jump, you don't. There's a season of transition. So all those relationships that I had that were invested in the young adult, they don't go away.
Right.
Especially, you know, still being here at the church. So then the hard part becomes trying to balance all of it, you know, doing what my heart feels called to do and the investment that I made, and not walking away from them because that's not what I'm going to do. And yet trying to, you know, birth something new and invest in something new. So that became the challenge, and still to some degree is the challenge. But God is faithful, and it's been good.
Yeah, very good. Do you think, you know, you mentioned you're relational to the core. I think that was what you just said.
I think so.
Yeah, and I would agree 100% with that. Do you think that is also part of what you could attribute to longevity in ministry, the relational aspect?
Yeah, I'm sure that it has a part of it, you know, just the connections that I've made here in Southwest Florida. But honestly, you know, it sounds like the Sunday school or life group answer when you say Jesus, but there have been seasons where, you know, I thought that God was moving us and then the door would close, or, you know, so I think that there are certainly those elements, there's those things. But when I think about longevity, I think God is in it. I think that a lot of it has to do with staying focused on what God has called you to do, which I think is a challenge for a lot of people. I can see at times how if I allow myself to start focusing in on things that God has not placed before me, then I can get sidetracked and I can lose my focus. And so it's been a real intentionality to stay focused on what God has called you to do, Cary, type of thing. And I think that's allowed me to stay in one place. When I've looked at friends of mine that have left, you know, a lot of times it's those issues that they get caught up in something that wasn't even their business. You know, it wasn't even their role, it wasn't their calling, but they can allow that to get, you know, off center. And I think that quality of persevering through times. I mean, 36 years, it's not all been rosy.
No.
So, but it's not allowing those things to distract me and saying, I'm done.
Yeah.
God's called me to a task, and I'm going to do that task. So
you used the word contentment earlier, and I think that's hard for some folks.
Yeah,
it really is. That's a tough biblical command that we are to be content wherever God has us. And it doesn't mean He doesn't move us, but it means that wherever we are in that moment, whether we have a lot or a little, that we are content that this is where God has me. And I think that is perhaps one of the key elements of longevity and ministry is finding that contentment, which is hard for a lot of folks.
I agree 100%, Mark. And the reality is it's not common in our society.
Right.
Our culture does not embrace contentment. And I think in ministry, not only the challenge of the grass is always greener on the other side. We think that we're going to go to a place where it doesn't have the problems that McGregor has, which is just is a fallacy. It's just not correct. But I also think there's this idea that the longer I stay in one place, the less that I'm appreciated. It's if you go someplace new, he's the new guy. He's got all the ideas, and so there's an allurement, there's an attraction to starting over. Somebody told me a couple of years ago, and it's really helped me because after 36 years, I've got so many names stored and so many people that have come through our ministry and lives, and that I get frustrated sometimes because I can't remember their names. And somebody said, You have never had a reset. He said, almost everybody in life has a reset moment. That's
a good point.
Where they start over.
Yeah.
And they just forget all those names, and you've never had that. And I'm like, well, I get off the hook a little bit, but it's been good. I don't think that, I can't imagine what it would have been like to not have stuck it out. And another benefit, I've got 3 adult kids now that all were raised here in Fort Myers. They all went to college here in Fort Myers. Now they all live here in Fort Myers. And I see how unique that is. My kids, my grandkids all live within a 5-minute radius of Vicki and I, and we see them multiple times a week. So, what a blessing, in a world where so many kids are
spread out all over. Yep.
Yeah. And I think that my kids, it's been a blessing to my kids. God has answered our prayer 36 years ago to be planted, and what a blessing that has been to my kids to be raised in the same place. Both my girls graduated from SFCA. Josh went to SFCA through 8th grade and then went to Fort Myers High. But to have those friends that are, they're lifelong friends as well. A good friend of mine, Bill White, sent me a text last night, way too late, by the way, but a picture of our kids playing basketball in probably 2nd or 3rd grade.
Oh, wow.
Ryan Flint was one of those kids, and his 2 daughters and my daughter. But you don't have that if you're bouncing around.
Right.
And my kids don't have that.
Exactly. So you've been in adult 55 plus world for about 5 years now. What are some things that are exciting you about that ministry right now?
Right now?
Well,
right. Well, I've been so blessed this year. Obviously, it's been such a year of transition, doing Zoom life groups and doing online. And I've shared this with you before, I'm just so blessed by our life group leadership and the investment that they have in their classes. Going back probably 2 years ago, our high on a Sunday morning in the 55 plus world was 746, I think it was, over 700 people. 700 people is a whole lot of senior adults to try to keep track of. So knowing that we have really great life group leadership that's really shepherding their small groups in a way that is significant, keeping up with the growing needs of that age demographic and the prayers and who's gone in the hospital or what one's struggling with, or, So I think that's been real exciting, and just seeing their ability to pivot into with the technology and to be able to do it well, and not easy, but to invest in it and to do it well. I think that's probably one of the things that really excites me, just to see the faithfulness of our senior adult leadership and what God's doing there.
Yeah.
So
I wonder how many are listening to this podcast right now.
I bet you there are more than you think.
I know. I hope so. Yeah. We're going to try to get as many as we can listening to our church podcast. And you're right. It was amazing to see back, this goes back a ways now when we first entered the pandemic, but how quick our adult 55 plus and even some of those older life groups were able to pivot and figure out how to make stuff work virtually and online when we couldn't meet in person. And so, you're right. That was kind of a cool thing because we what are they going to do? And they figured it out.
Yeah. When we started talking about, doing Zoom, I'm like, they'll never do it, and I mean, I'm not the most technically advanced person.
Really?
I credit the fact that I've got, really. But I've got kids and people in my life that really help me out a lot when it comes to technology, which is a huge blessing. But they managed, they figured it out, whether they had people in their life that could help them or somebody that could teach them. But it's gone really, really well. It is, praise the Lord, it is phasing out, which I think is a really healthy sign. I think that more and more people are coming back.
Less and less Zoom.
Less and less Zoom.
Amen.
And I know our leadership is thrilled about that because it's not the easiest of things to do.
Yeah. What would you, and I know you have such a mentor's heart with discipling people, and what would you, to somebody that was just graduating from seminary and getting ready, maybe they're heading to their first church, what would be a little bit of advice, Cary Robinson wisdom you might throw their way?
I've actually given that advice several times. Not to move too quickly. I think sometimes young guys coming out of seminary have a lot of great ideas and they want to change the world in a month. And I think that can be devastating to a ministry. You got to embrace the culture and figure out what's going on, and to really try to get to know your people. That's one of the things I've told a lot of different through the years. The advice is, get in there the first 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. Just get to know your people. Get the names, know the faces, know the families. Because once people start recognizing that you care about them as an individual, they're willing to follow you and they're willing to do a lot. So it's really important, and I think that you'll find that changing a program may be necessary, but learning people is more important.
Right. Slow down and get to know the folks. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good word. Really good word. Yep. Anything else that stands out in your mind over the last 36 years here at McGregor that's been kind of a special moment, that maybe a highlight?
Well, I could probably, we would not have enough time. But I could tell you honestly, and you're privy to this because we're in a lot of meetings together, but one of the highlights is that now there's numerous people on our staff that were in my youth ministry or student ministry or college ministry. Ryan Flint, Tammy Goodwin, Nancy Perez, people that are around and still involved in my life that were involved in my life 30 some years ago, which is, it's pretty cool. And in many ways that's a highlight, but God is good and God is so faithful. And I couldn't speak strongly enough about how I don't think that men and women that enter a place and say, I'm going to stick there for 36 years like Cary. I don't think you can do it. I just think, you can stay focused and do what God's called you to do, but, just trusting in God's faithfulness. I think some people leave for the wrong reason, but, that's a highlight, is just being able to stay, to recognize what God has done and his faithfulness. And
what a blessing that is.
What a blessing it is.
Yeah, it really is. And I consider that for myself to be here 21 years, a blessing. And that you look around and that's, that tenure of the folks that we have a chance to serve with. We have new folks that are coming in, but there's several of us that have been together for a long time, and that in and of itself is a blessing also. Yeah.
You guys like to tease me that I've been around a long time, but
yes, we do. Regularly.
Yes, you do.
You notice I'm doing a lot of restraint here.
Age.
I've not said much of anything. It's all been positive.
You've been very good.
Very good.
But I look at it as like, yeah, I've been here for 36 years. That's a long time, but the men that I work with have been around a long time. Men and women that I've been work with have been around a long time. So it's not just me, and I think that's a tribute to our church. When I think about it, I think that maybe part of that is a legacy of Jim Holbrook. It's just created an environment where our people are very affirming. I believe our people are very affirming. They follow well. It doesn't mean they don't have an opinion, but they follow well, and it enables us to stay. So
very supportive and encouraging.
Thank you. Those are the words I was looking for.
Yeah, and we are blessed here at McGregor in so many ways. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me,
Pastor Mark,
for being a part of the Here at Home podcast. It's been a privilege. It seems like, our offices are right next to each other, and we often just sit around and talk a little bit, so it's not much different other than we got a microphone in front of us today, and we're talking mostly about you and your longevity here. Yeah. So this wraps up this episode of Here at Home, and thank you, Cary, for joining us and being a part of it. And thank you, listeners, also for being a part of our podcast. What a blessing it is to be able to share what God is doing here at home and to be encouraged together. And if you haven't subscribed yet to this podcast, please take a moment to do that right now. And while you're subscribing, you might want to check out our other podcast channels. You can head over to hereathomepodcast.com for all the details of all the other podcast channels that we have. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks back here at home.